And good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Xanadu Gallery Art Business Academy online critique group session. Today's session is an Ask Me Anything session, as we do every third Wednesday. We're a few minutes late getting started. I was invited and had the opportunity to be on a radio show talking about the future of the art market and art business. I'll be sharing the link to that. But it ran right up to 9 o'clock. So we're starting just a few minutes late, but that's not going to stop us from getting to as many of your questions as we can. And as usual, received a tremendous number of great questions, and I want to jump right into them and get to just as many of them as we can. Our first question comes from Patricia Pope in Florida. I'm not even going to bring it up because it's a short question, and it's a meta question. It is about this broadcast, and she asks, how do you select each week's artist? And I know a number of you have wondered this, and just very briefly, we started out this process by sending out some invites for submissions to Red Dot blog readers, asking to submit artwork that we could review and consider for inclusion in the online critique broadcast, and received a tremendous number of responses. We've been working our way through still some of those initial submissions. And then also recently, those of you who have been attending know that we opened it up so that anyone who is attending the sessions or watching the recordings has an opportunity to submit their artwork. So that tells you about the submission side of things. Now, how about the selection side of things? And in essence, what we've done is we're going through and working through the submissions. My hope is to get to all of them eventually, each and every one of you who has submitted. But we're trying to select art that kind of makes sense for particular elements that we want to emphasize in the conversation. And so over the last several months, you've seen a wide variety of subject matter, styles, media. I think that there are things that we can all learn by looking at other artists' work. And thinking about art maybe in a little different way, or what it would be like to be working in a different, maybe less common media, and that there are things we can learn by having discussions about that art that you can hopefully then apply to your own work, to the marketing of your work. We also wouldn't want to be doing reviews of, let's just pick a random one, watercolor landscape paintings week after week after week. We want to keep a good variety going, and get a good mix going. So that's basically it. There are no secrets. There is no secret bribe you can pay to someone to get moved up in the line or anything like that. Just know that if you have submitted, we are reviewing your work. We will and are working towards getting to you. And if you haven't submitted yet, there is a link on the broadcast and archive page that gives you the opportunity to answer a few questions, upload a few pieces of your artwork, and you will then be in the queue for consideration for future broadcasts. So that's the long way to answer that question. But just stick with it. If you haven't been featured yet, you will get an opportunity to sit in the hot seat. Okay, the second question, and I will pull this one up, comes from Sharon Vandenberg from Cocoa Beach, Florida. And Sharon asks, my work has been described as neo-expressionism cutting edge. Can you recommend a gallery in the world that is open to this type of painting? First, it's a little bit challenging just taking, four words, neo-expressionism, cutting edge, and knowing exactly what that means with your work. But even if I had the work in front of me, you would find a certain reluctance on my part to recommend any specific galleries. Instead, what I would encourage you to do is to think pretty broadly. And you're going to hear me say this in this broadcast. If you have an opportunity to take one of the workshops that I do online or in person, you'll see that that my recommendation is that you strive to really broaden the outreach with your work. Create a portfolio. Get your artwork out in front of a bunch of galleries, galleries that are featuring a wide range of different subject matter and media. It sounds like you're probably going to be focusing on more contemporary galleries as opposed to traditional. But the name of the game, Sharon, is number one, not to psych yourself out. You've had someone tell you that your work is neo-expressionism, cutting edge. And I get the sense that maybe you think, well, that really limits then the kinds of galleries that might be interested in my work. Maybe no one is going to be interested in my work because it's too cutting edge. And what I would say to you is I just don't subscribe to that perspective of the world, that there is a scarcity of interest in the type of work that you're doing, that there aren't going to be venues that would be interested in showcasing and sharing your artwork. Yes, obviously it's going to be maybe a little bit narrow bandwidth depending on the type of work that you're doing. But I would just encourage you to, you can't know who's going to be the right venue for your work until you start getting it out there and showing it. Now, the last thing I'll say on this is that I am always reluctant to point to specific galleries because I just have no idea what any other gallery owner is thinking or looking for or interested in. And the last thing I would want to do is send you to that gallery and it ends up being the completely wrong fit. And then you feel like, oh my goodness, no one's going to be interested in my work. I can't get it out there. Or the gallery owner is going to come to me and say, Jason, what were you thinking? Why did you send that artist to me? It was the strangest work I've ever seen. And you'll find that most gallery owners are just very reluctant to be too specific in giving you direction on where to go with your work. And I would just say that it wouldn't even necessarily be very effective to get those kind of specific recommendations. Instead, it's a numbers game, and we want to get your artwork, your portfolio, your images out in front of as many gallery owners as you can. Now, there are many other considerations to take into account. Are you creating consistent work? Is the work presented in a way that is going to appeal to a gallery that they're going to be able to show and market and sell? Those are all variables that we're all working on, but that's part of the reason that we're here in these critique group sessions, is so that we can look at the different work that we're doing and have conversations that will hopefully help you take it in the right direction. Anyone want to jump in with comments on what you've found maybe in directing your not typical, not traditional, or alternative work in finding venues and galleries that might be of help to Sharon? Any bits of advice that you might want to give? And if you want to just jump in, I think you can either click on raise your hand, you can unmute yourself and hop in, and we'll just take the conversation. Let me go to Kate. I've got Kate in the panel. Kate, good morning. Welcome. It should be asking you to unmute.
When I've been looking for galleries, I would start with equine galleries because that's the kind of work I do. But I also looked through art magazines and saw, okay, who's showing work similar to mine? And there's a lot of galleries out there.
And when you say similar to mine, try to be open-minded about that, not to eliminate galleries because you're saying to yourself, maybe not, I'm not going to risk it. I would just say risk it all. You've got nothing to lose.
Absolutely.
Just put the work out there and let people see it.
Absolutely.
Anyone else want to jump in with a comment on experiences that you've had talking to galleries, maybe even when the work wasn't the right fit, what the feedback was that you got, or just, again, any advice you might give that could be helpful? And if not, we're going to roll to the next question. All right, go. Oh, I've got Sue. Let me get Sue in. Good morning, Sue.
Hi, how are you? I don't know if you can see me. I do take work down to a gallery, and quite often the owner will make suggestions. And they've said to me, you don't know how different you are for not being offended by this. But I said, you are the one who's selling my work. If you feel like this is not going to work, or you have, I'm always more than happy to hear that. So I guess I would just encourage people to leave their egos at home.
Yes.
It's not about you. It's about the artwork. And if somebody's willing to give you some advice, I would just definitely take up on that opportunity.
Yeah. And, from a theoretical standpoint, and it's great advice. You really want to just be open to taking feedback about your work, not being afraid to be rejected if the gallery isn't a fit. Because as you say, Sue, they're not rejecting your work because they hate you or they think you're inferior. They just don't think they're going to be good at selling that work. So in essence, they're doing you a favor because they're giving you the opportunity to move on and find a venue that will be better suited to the work. And so, yeah, you want to be open and you just want to be having as many conversations around your artwork with galleries as you can as you're in that phase that you're starting to get ready to show your work in galleries. And again, we want to make sure that you've laid the groundwork. You know, and done the preparation to have good conversations with the galleries that you're ready. And again, hopefully that's why we're all here, is to kind of be working towards perfecting the artwork that you have available to show to galleries so that you can have better responses to that work. This next question comes from Sally, and I'm going to go ahead and throw us all back on mute here. This question is from Sally Landis in Oakland, California. And Sally asks, what exactly do you submit to a gallery these days to show them your work? So this is a good continuation of the last question. Long gone are the days of submitting a sheet of slides with an attached bio statement or even a CD, but I don't know what's replaced them. A link to my website, that doesn't seem very personal. It's a great question, Sally. And again, this is a question that I get into in a lot more detail when I'm doing a workshop or in the Art Business Academy we work through specifically. But what I am seeing and what is most effective from a gallery owner's perspective to be receiving from an artist is a digital portfolio. And that is to say that the artist has gone through and created a finite, typically it's in a PDF format or some similar format. It's 20 to 30 different images that are compiled together. And what I like to see is the image of the artwork, title, size, price, medium, all on one quote unquote page. It's a digital page, if you will. But I feel that this, and in my experience, this is more effective than, as you say, a link to a website. Because as you mentioned, a website just has kind of more of a catch-all effect to it. It's all of my work. You know, it is the viewer picking where they're going and what they're seeing, what the order is. Whereas if you create a digital portfolio, you get to have some control over the narrative, over the format and presentation, and you get to keep it very focused on work that's primarily available. You can show a few sold pieces, but primarily available work that would be appropriate for that gallery. And of course, the nice thing about a digital portfolio is that once you have it set up, it's fairly easy to keep it up to date, to keep your images updated, and to change it as you need to, depending on the venues that you're sending that portfolio to. And as you say, I do still occasionally get a CD or even a physical portfolio, and you know, those can work. The name of the game is to get the image in front of the gallery owner, but this digital format allows you to be a lot more flexible in presenting that portfolio. One quick story, and then I'll move on. Sally mentioned a sheet of slides, 35 millimeter slides. That was the format. When I started in the business in the early 90s, we were still seeing that. And about 2005, I hired a young salesperson and assistant director to the gallery, and we received a portfolio that was a sheet of 35 millimeter slides. My assistant opened it. She was in her early 20s at the time. And I came around the corner, and there she was. She had taken the 35 millimeter slides out of the sheet protector, and she was trying to figure out where they fit in her computer, which slot they went into to look at them, because she had never seen a 35 millimeter slide before. And I think it's just a testament to how quickly technology is changing and formats are changing. But I think that this digital format, creating a portfolio in a PDF format, makes it very easy for you to share via email or through an online submission, or you can load it on an iPad or other tablet and be able to show it to a gallery owner in person. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility. Maria, who was one of our featured artists last week, actually, asks a question. We were having a conversation about the format of her work. And the conversation kind of came around to thinking about not necessarily framing the work, but instead presenting the work on gallery wrapped canvases. And Maria asks, just about decided to go all 1.5-inch gallery wrap canvases to avoid the whole frame issue. Maria, I might even suggest you think about going to 2-inch. Deeper can be a little bit better. 1.5 is kind of my minimum if you're not framing. And I have a lot of artists who are showing at the 1.5, but I also have some artists who are going to 2.5 inch deep canvases. And it just gives it a little bit more of a visual presence. So especially for larger works, I would consider that. Maria goes on to ask, what are the feelings about the back being stapled or splined onto these stretchers? I will tell you that all of the artists that I'm working with who are working on gallery wraps are stapling the canvas. I'm not seeing very many that are using a spline. Either way is fine. Ultimately, it's what presents your work in what you feel is the most aesthetically pleasing, professional manner that you can. And so depending on the supplier that you work with, or if you're making them yourself, the process that you're using either can work. And Marie goes on, I've always used the back stapled, but here that splined is preferred for frameless hanging. I often paint the side in indigo, except for the one show where I was mixing natural frames and unframed pieces, used titanium buff. Is a light neutral shade more wall friendly, or is it better to use the dominant painting color? So great questions. And we've worked with a number of artists in these sessions and looked at presentation and seen a variety of approaches to this. And what I will say is it kind of depends on the effect you want to get, but what I would strive for is consistency. In other words, the more that you can have all of the work coming out of your studio being consistent in terms of presentation, the more effective it's going to be showing it to galleries and in exhibitions, and frankly, in a collector's home as they're buying multiple pieces. The more consistent you can be, the better. And so I do have some artists who go light. I have some who go dark on the sides. I have artists who extend the painting around the side of the canvas to kind of add dimension and create harmony between the sides of the back. So I don't know that there's necessarily a right or wrong answer to these kinds of questions, as much as there is just the suggestion that you strive to find what you feel works best for your work and then stick to it. That the more you can be consistent in that, the more effective your presentation is going to be over time. It looks like I've got a few hands up, or at least a hand or two. Let me get you in. And if you want to jump in with comments about presentation or depth of the canvas, you can do that. Or if you have a comment on a previous one, I think I've got Kathy here. Let's see if I can get Kathy Engelmarter in. Good morning, Kathy.
Morning.
Gotcha.
Yeah. You were talking about you were talking about presenting to a gallery using JPEGs. And my question is, how useful is Instagram in reaching galleries with your work?
Yeah, so and you bring up a very good point, that there are many different avenues to expose your work to galleries, to the public, to potential buyers and collectors. And so it can become a little bit muddled in terms of thinking about, where should I be putting my focus? What should I be creating? And certainly social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter to a lesser degree, and Pinterest, all of these avenues provide opportunities for you to share and show your work. My experience is that Instagram and the like are not going to be as effective in getting your work in front of gallery owners because it's harder to target specific galleries. In essence, you can't be quite as proactive about getting your work in front of a gallery owner. You're posting to Instagram, you're adding some tags, maybe you're even doing some direct messaging, which would provide some opportunity. But in most cases with social media, it's more about creating a body of posts, if you will, a bunch of images of your work, sharing them, posting them, and then waiting for viewers to come across them through the feed, or in essence, relying on an algorithm to put your work in front of the right people. And so you don't have as much control over that. Whereas using a PDF portfolio, which you then either email directly to a gallery owner or go in person physically show it to a gallery owner, now you have a very specific opportunity to present the artwork, and it's more personalized. So that's not to say that you shouldn't be doing social media posts. We all should. We should just understand that they have different purposes, and maybe you'll even get lucky and a gallery owner will be on Instagram, will see your work and will respond to it. But I like to have a little bit more control over my fate than that, and be more specific in the approaches. And so you should have both a PDF portfolio. Actually, you should have all of them: a PDF portfolio, a website, a fairly extensive social media presence as time allows you. And that by doing all of those things in conjunction, you start to increase the possibilities for response to your work. Anyway, I've got Laura who's got a question. Laura, let me see if I can get you in. Should be asking you to unmute. Laura, good morning.
Yeah, hi. You just said a PDF, and I'm curious about that because I generally save my images as a JPEG, and my experience is PDFs are huge files, so sending that off would be a gigantic file to send.
Yes, so it's a good point. And so in essence, what I'm recommending, and again, I would get much more specific about this in a workshop and give you kind of the step-by-step, but the short answer is what you're wanting to do. And the reason I'm not just sending a bunch of JPEGs or a grouping of images is because, again, I lose control over a little bit over the presentation of the work, whereas with a PDF, I get to control the pagination of the work. And what I would recommend is you use a program like a PowerPoint or Apple Keynote or Google Slides. Create images that are uniform, or excuse me, pages that are uniform. Drop your images in, export it as a PDF, and then you can have Acrobat or even these programs will export them in a lower resolution format that won't be huge. In other words, you're not going to be sharing full resolution images of your work. You're just wanting to give a format that lets me see the work, see the information about the work, sizes, title, pricing information in a helpful way. And so here's what I'm going to do to help us with this. I can see we've got lots of questions on portfolio format. I'm going to drop a link in the resources below the recording of this session, below today's session, down in the archive, with a sample PDF portfolio that will give you a good idea of a starting point in terms of design and layout. You'll see how large the file is and what's possible, and you could kind of use that as a starting point. You can be creative about the design and thinking about how you would best show your work, but this would give you a good idea for format. Let me go to a question from Dennis in Milwaukee. Let's get Dennis's question up here. Dennis says, as a gallery owner, your intent is to keep your gallery full of art. That's partly true. Actually, my intent is to empty my gallery of art as regularly and quickly as I can. But you're right. When I sell a piece of artwork, I want to quickly replace it. And so Dennis goes on and says, what criteria do you use when contemplating adding new artists and their work? Would you replace an artist or reduce the number of existing art to fit the new art? It's a great question, and it kind of goes into the logistics of how galleries operate and work. And you're right, as a gallery owner, there's a lot to think about as you're contemplating adding a new artist. And I kind of think of my gallery in some ways as a living organism that is constantly growing and evolving and changing. And I want my clientele, my visitors, the collectors who come to my gallery, to have an interesting and exciting experience each time they visit the gallery. And so part of that means keeping it a dynamic place where they're going to see new artwork by artists that they're already familiar with, that they've already seen in the gallery, but also introducing new artwork to them. But as Dennis intimates here, I don't have an infinite gallery space. And so there are decisions that have to be made about, who's going to show where, what pieces are going to be featured on what walls and pedestals. And every time you bring on a new artist, you do have to think about, well, what does this mean in terms of displaying the other artwork that I'm showing? So here's a little bit of my process. Number one, in terms of criteria of what I'm thinking about when I'm bringing on new artists is I'm going to be asking questions like, does this new artwork, will it introduce something interesting and different into the mix? Does it provide me an opportunity to excite my collectors in an interesting way? Is it interesting to me personally? Number two, I want to be careful about not bringing in artwork that's too close to artists that I'm already showing. I don't want to cannibalize sales from my existing artists. And so there's kind of that going on. And then I also have to think, okay, if I bring this artist in, what's it going to be replacing? And that is the harder part of the conversation. And I posted recently on my blog about this, kind of that process of saying goodbye to a gallery or a gallery saying goodbye to you. We all wish that every artist we brought into the gallery or every time you go to show with a new venue, that it would be a smashing success forever, that it would become more and more successful over time, more and more pieces would sell. Sometimes it lasts for a really long time, but any relationship is going to go through phases and is going to be dynamic. And the reality is that sometimes an artist that I'm really excited about and bring into the gallery and think is going to do very well, that just doesn't happen. It doesn't resonate with my collectors. So it's only natural that that artist is over time going to, if the work isn't selling, that artist is going to have less display space in the gallery. You'll see that my gallery we're pretty loyal to artists that we bring on and really try to promote and market and sell and push and make those sales happen. And sometimes it takes a while for it to occur. But we also try to be realistic and know that if we're not selling art for an artist, it's not doing us any good, but it's also not doing the artist any good. That artist should be looking for a new venue where the work is going to resonate. And I think I've mentioned it here previously that I have had instances where I've said goodbye to an artist. It's just not working. It usually goes something like this. It isn't you, it's us. It is really very much like a relationship. And I've seen the artists leave our gallery and go to another gallery very close to us and immediately start selling. And sometimes you just don't know what the dynamics are that are going to be driving those sales. And so, you're exactly right. There are hard decisions that have to be made, and it's a process. But it's also what keeps the business interesting and galleries interesting and makes it interesting for you to visit galleries to see and discover new things. And the same is true for us. And so in my gallery, just kind of closing here, you will see a variety of artists, including several artists who I have been showing for the full 19 years that we've been in business. There are some artists that we've just managed to sell steadily throughout that whole time. And then if you were to look at other artists that we've carried throughout the time, there have been some that we would carry for 5 or 7 or 10 years, and then it was just time to move on. And then there are some artists that after a couple of years, we look at it realistically and say, it just isn't working. Let's move on to another phase and show someone else, and you can go show in a new venue. And we just keep working at it. And so, as an artist, again, we talked about it earlier, try not to take things too personally. It is not at all an indication of the viability of your work that a particular gallery just hasn't taken off the way you would have wanted it to. You move on and show in a new venue and keep showing and producing work, and eventually it'll start to click. Carol Bevins from Denver, Colorado. Let me get her question up here. Asks, are the info tags attached to the back of a painting when in a show supposed to stay on the painting forever? Some shows require them to be permanently attached. I use washi tape because it's pretty and can be removed, but recently saw a pic of a famous work that had them all on it, and it was cool to see all of that history. What's the best practice? And I have seen this as well. There are some shows that have their own informational tags. The short of it is, wherever you're showing your work, whether it's an exhibition at a museum or a weekend art festival or a big convention show that's been put together or a gallery show, that venue wants to have easy access to information about your art. And so they are going to ask you, especially if it's a well-organized large show, they're going to have a specific format that they want that information. They want it included on the artwork so that if you're not there to answer questions, they have the information at their fingertips. So the question you're asking, Carol, is do I leave the artwork or do I leave the tag that they've provided there? And if it's in multiple shows, do I leave those tags? And in essence, if you were to do that, what you're doing in some ways is kind of creating a provenance for that piece of artwork. Where has this artwork shown? Who's had it? Who's seen it? And I do think that there could be some interest in that. We would find it particularly interesting if we were to take a Monet, look at the back and see that it had been in several salons or that kind of thing. It would give us some history of the artwork. The challenge, though, for me and for the way I'm typically thinking about this is, does it help me sell the artwork? And tags on the back of the artwork probably aren't going to be a big deal. My only concern, though, would be if you had a collector see the back of the piece and see a number of different shows and have them ask the question, how is it that this piece of artwork has gone to so many shows and hasn't sold? What's wrong with it? Why aren't people buying it? And I don't think that would be a huge concern or a big issue in most cases. But on the other hand, we want artwork to sell as quickly as it can with as few impediments as possible. And you might also ask yourself that question: why am I sending these pieces to all these shows if they're not generating sales? I want to be focusing on getting the work into shows where it's going to sell or venues where it's going to sell. So two quick things then. One, I would go ahead and have your own format for including the information on the back of the piece. And maybe it's a label or a tag, or maybe you're writing it on the stretcher. But including your inventory number, your size, title, pricing information, although you have to be a little careful about pricing information because it can change over time. So you'd want to have a system where you could update that pricing information. But at least your name, title, inventory number, size, medium, that information will help your galleries and other venues know what they're looking at and be able to get the information that they need. I'm going to go into a little bit of lightning mode here because we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to move through these questions pretty quickly, and I'll leave a little time at the end for you to jump in with any additional comments or questions. Robert asks the question, is it advisable to call a gallery that you are confident your work will fit into and ask if they're taking submissions for review? I'm going to pause here and say, I don't think it's advisable, because by asking that question, are you taking submissions for review, you're giving the gallery the opportunity to say no, and why would I give them that opportunity? I would prefer you just be assumptive and submit your artwork to them. And again, I've written, not to toot my own horn, but I've written a book about this. I do broadcasts about it and workshops about it to talk about kind of that process. But the short answer there is I would just skip that step and go straight to the submission, which is the second part of the question, which is it better to go to the gallery in person, perhaps at an opening? No, not at an opening. because the owner's going to be distracted. You can go to an opening and get to know people, but you want to kind of stay out of the way. You don't want to become seen as an impediment to their process of working with customers. But as you say here, Robert, get to know the director first, mention in person that you're a painter, et cetera, and interested in submitting work to them for review. I just see the challenge to all of this being that you're giving yourself too many opportunities for them to say no, and you're extending out this process and making it more complex and challenging than it really needs to be. Let's cut to the chase. Let's put the portfolio in front of the gallery owner, let them see the work, and let them give you a yes or no. Then we don't have all this beating around the bush of, well, the gallery owner doesn't really seem interested in talking to me, or I didn't get a good relationship going. Instead, we need to be thinking about this as not just I'm putting it in front of one gallery owner in a gallery that I think is the right fit. And instead, I would encourage you to think about presenting your artwork to as many galleries as you can, as efficiently and effectively as you can. And so don't overthink this, Robert. Just get that portfolio put together. And as the work is strong and consistent, you'll get opportunities to have conversations after you show the portfolio. Heidi from La Crosse, Wisconsin asks, I love to oil paint and draw. Just starting to market my work. I have some problems with frames. I feel that my art should be framed using something like a masterwork frame, but I'm not sure I can justify the price. Can an artist price the art separate from the frame? So then she gives an example formula, per square inch formula, plus the frame. How do I work this so that I can use masterwork frames? And this is a good way to kind of think about this challenge is think about what you want. What would be ideal for presenting your work? What's the ideal substrate to work on? What's the best canvas maker I could work with, and what are the best materials that I can use? What's the best frame that I can present the work in? And if I do all of that in the ideal way, then where does my price point be? And as a consequence of that, where would I need to be showing my artwork? I find a lot of times we tend to think of this in the other direction where we're thinking, you know, I'm new to this, just getting started. I'm in an area that doesn't have a lot of galleries. My price points need to be low. So I've got to make a bunch of decisions that then allow me to hopefully eke out some profit from these low price points. And there is some validity to understanding the market. And certainly when you're breaking into the art market, you're going to cut your teeth probably in some venues and shows where price points are going to be lower. But at the same time, I think it's also a very valuable exercise to be thinking, okay, if I were to create the ideal piece of artwork, what would the components of that be? How much investment would be going into creating that piece of artwork? Where would my price points need to be? And then thinking, okay, where could I then go and show and sell this artwork? So that would be the first thing, is to be thinking of it in that order. The second part is when it comes to the pricing, if you're going to be working with galleries, the pricing needs to be very simple. When you come to my gallery and present your artwork, I only want to hear one number when it comes to the value of the work, and that is the retail price. So you're not going to be explaining to me about the cost of the frame and it's separate and the commission and all those kind of things. No, there's the retail price. From that retail price, we will split our commissions when the piece sells. You'll receive typically 50% of that. And you just need to make sure then that your 50% of the sale price will cover all the materials that went into it and your time and your overhead and leave you some profit margin. And in the early days, it may be pretty tight profit margin, but over time, the desire is to be moving that up, moving the retail value up so that you have more and more room to create profit. But again, Heidi, if you're saying I've got a very specific frame I want to use, and I know that it has a certain investment involved in getting that frame, then you really do need to be reverse engineering and thinking about where can I show that work that will allow me to command those higher prices. We'll take one last question from Barry, and then we'll open up for discussion. Barry asks, I'm curious about doing digital prints and what the market might be for them. Is the big city more likely to show and sell prints? What are the attitudes of people collecting art about prints, galleries, art shows? And Barry says, the reason I ask a practical one, my hands don't work as well as they used to, and I can produce digital work faster and cheaper than making originals. Probably keep doing originals, but not as many. I was just wondering if there might be a market for fine art prints within the gallery world. I know there are lots of companies selling prints. And yeah, this is a very broad art market. And there is artwork selling at every price point. And every mechanism for creating the artwork can find a market. And so certainly prints and digital prints, there are venues out there. Digital is a little bit interesting, and I'm assuming, Barry, that you're talking about it is digital from start to finish. You're creating it digitally, producing it digitally, and that, it's not that you're creating an original painting and then moving it to digital. And what I would say is that digital art is becoming more widely accepted. It was a little challenging in the last couple of decades for artists who were kind of breaking into the digital market. But I think, and I am seeing, and we are selling work that has been primarily created digitally, or that is some hybrid of photography and digital manipulation, that there's just going to be a wider and wider acceptance of that. And so, yes, again, it comes down to that same question. Am I creating the very best artwork that I can? What do I need to do then to get that work out in front of the influencers and gallery owners who could show it to the people who are most likely to buy it? How are other artists pricing similar work? Where are they showing it? And doing all of that research can put you in a position where you can successfully turn whatever your medium is into, you can sell it. You can turn it into a successful career as an artist. So with that, we'll take the last few minutes here, and I do have to have a hard stop at 2 minutes before the hour because I have to rush out of my office to open the gallery at 10 a.m. here. But let me take your comments, questions, any discussion you want to have about anything that we've talked about in today's session, or any other questions that you have. And if you're in the video and you want to throw a hand up, or if you want to click on the hand icon, I can bring you in. But I'd love to get your feedback, comments, and questions. So anyone want to jump in? And I'm going to go ahead and put everybody's hand down to start because I'm not sure if I've got old hands up there. But anyone want to jump in with conversation? Don't make me beg. Okay, Catherine, I've got you. I'll start with you, and then I'll go over to Kate.
I am unmuted, yeah. My question was just about sizing. When you write down the size, is it the size of the work that you've done, the piece of paper you've done it on, or when it's completely framed?
Yeah, good question. It will vary a little bit depending on the work itself. Here is kind of the rule of thumb that we use, and some galleries may have a little bit different perspective on this, but if you are, as an artist, are creating imagery that is using only a portion of your substrate, maybe it's a study on a large sheet of paper, but you're going to show the paper because you like to have that negative space, et cetera, et cetera. As long as it's fairly easy for the viewer to understand what's going on, my preference is to use the size of the artwork. So if you've used 10 by 8 inches of a 30 by 40 sheet of paper, I'm typically going to have you list the part of the paper that you've used. But if it is an extreme difference like that, in the description of the artwork, I will always mention, image 10 by 8 inches, total canvas or paper 30 by 40 inches, framed size. We just want to give as much information as possible, but it makes sense to my collectors, and the way they're thinking about it is that they're buying your execution of the artwork. They don't want to be paying for a bunch of blank canvas or blank paper, and so that sizing is the size that's important to them. then the secondary thing that's important to them is they need to understand how the artwork is going to fit into their space. And so fortunately with websites and with your portfolio, it's fairly easy to include the additional information that you need to include. And you may need to have multiple images of the piece, a detail showing the artwork, and then a larger image showing the overall canvas that you're working on. But you just want to give as much information as possible.
Okay, I mean, sorry, my habit has just been to say it's A2 or it's A3 because it's quick.
Yeah, which again, that might be the secondary information. If you know, if you're only using a small portion of that, I would say image such and such size on A2 paper, and then that will give us the sense of the scale of the work that you're doing.
Okay.
Let me go to Casey. I think Casey, you had a question. Then I'll go to Kate.
Hi. Yeah. So I've been fooling around here for quite a few years with this art business, and I've done shows, and I've had some gallery shows, and some bigger ones have come up. I've been in a few invitationals, and I think I might be getting to the point where I'm just about ready to approach a gallery or two locally.
Sure.
How do we make that decision? I mean, you say, are you doing the best work you can do? Well, no, of course not. I'm not dead yet.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, so how? And then there's that whole thing of, you know, oh God, I love this piece. I think it's the best thing I've ever done. And then a week later, I hate it, you know, or there's something that I think is, you know, not my best work, and other people absolutely adore it. So, good Lord, you know, how do you make those decisions?
Good question, Casey. How do I know when I'm ready? And my suggestion is that if you wait until you're ready, you're never going to do it, because there's always something in the way of, you know, keeping us from feeling like we're as ready as we could be. My response is, you already have a proof of concept. You've already shown your work. You've already sold work. You know that there are people out there who'd be interested in buying your work. And remember, there are a wide range of art galleries out there. There are galleries that are showing Rembrandts and Monets, and we're probably going to have a hard time getting your work into that kind of venue. But then there's a whole spectrum of galleries that are showing work from artists at various phases of their careers. And a lot of us are less worried about how established is Casey, or how long has she been working, or how much has she been selling, as opposed to looking at your work and saying, this is really interesting work. I think my collectors would be interested in showing it. And so my response to that case would be, go for it. There is no time like the present to just get out there and start showing your work. And, you know, early in your career, you're going to have more misses than hits when it comes to talking to galleries and responses to your work. But I cannot tell you how many artists I've seen who very early in their career have gone out. You know, maybe they've only been creating a couple years, maybe they're in their early 20s, or maybe they started later and just been doing it for a few years. They've gone out and talked to galleries, and the gallery owner said, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. And the sooner you start that process, the more you have time on your side to perfect the work you're putting out, and the way it's being displayed and shown, in the narrative that you're sharing. So I would just tell you to get started in that process. And there's a lot that you learn during that process. And for a lot of us, there is some real fake it till you make it kind of stuff going on, you know, and putting your work out there and talking to galleries. So Casey, I would say that go for it. I'm going to have to close this now, because I do have to run out and open the gallery. But thank you all for joining us for this session. We're going to be back next week looking at another artist's work. Third Wednesdays are always going to be Ask Me Anything sessions, so save your questions up for that Wednesday. Of course, we'll be having other conversations on the blog and talking about all these issues, so I look forward to being in touch with all of you. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session.